Coming up on Dialogue Weekend. While food prices surge and the world faces a hunger crisis, top US grain giants have reportedly reaped record profits, raising concerns of profiteering and speculation. What's the situation and what role is the US playing to end the crisis? China has condemned US cyber attacks on China's Northwestern Polytechnical University after investigation shows NSA breach. What is the US National Security Agency and how does it work? And how can cybersecurity be improved? And this week's newsmaker. Now on Dialogue Weekend.
Welcome to this edition of Dialogue Weekend. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, an energy shortage hits large parts of Europe, possibly to get worse in winter, and even more troubling crisis is looming, especially in developing countries, as food shortages arise as a consequence of the conflict in Ukraine and the sanctions on Russia. But international grain firms, especially the four largest, known as A, B, C, D, are making record profits amid this worldwide food crisis. How have grain traders made so much in the situation? And are they part of the solution or part of the problem when it comes to the food shortage in struggling countries? To find out, I'm joined in this part by Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, Josef Gregory Mahoney, Professor of Politics at East China Normal University, and Rob Voss, Director for Market, Trade and Institutions of the International Food Policy Research Institute. Welcome to the discussion. Well, Rob, I will start with you. You know, this is from The Guardian, the newspaper from Britain. There's a recent report. It said that, the world's top grain traders have enjoyed a record bonanza amid soaring food prices around the world. So what's your take on that? Is that the true situation?
On the program per role. The four large companies you mentioned are actually called Archer Daniels Midland, Bunge, and Cargill, and Louis Dreyfus. And Cargill is the largest of them. These are very big companies that command a lot of the grains trade in the world, but they're not just doing that. They have other businesses, and they stretch out from processing input markets, fertilizer markets. So they're very big companies, and they're privately owned, still family owned. So really, we don't know a lot what they're doing, but we do know that they command a lot of the trade. So the way they make profits, since they command so much trade, is by selling a lot and at the high prices. That's what's giving them high profits at the moment. But it would be far-fetched to say that they're the problem of the current food crisis, because they're trying to trade as much as they can and make a lot of profit. So it's not that that they're part of the food shortages. The only thing you can say, maybe it's an inequity problem, that they make so much profits where other people suffer in the world. But they're trying to ship around as much grains as possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, tell us more about these top grain firms. Who are they? People call them A, B, C, D. Easy to remember, but in terms of the specific information, few people probably have the access or fully understand what's going on.
Yeah, well, these are three American companies and one French company, but headquartered in Holland. The largest, of course, is the very famous American company, ADM, Archer Daniels Midland Company. I think it's based in Illinois, and there are two more, Bunge and Cargill. I mean, these are the three largest American companies, heavily in the business of trading and also involved in logistics. And there's one company called the Louis Dreyfus. It's a French company based in Holland. The reason they are so powerful in this business is because they own the logistics, they own the the facilities in the trade of the grain products. For example, they own the storage facilities, the facilities that collect these agricultural products. They also do a lot of processing. They own the fleets of ships transporting these grain. grains are not transported in containers. I mean, they are specialized ships to transport these products. So they own whole fleets of these things, and that's why they're so powerful, commanding huge market power in this business. And I'm not surprised at all that they're making a huge profits at this point. You know, it's the very sense of capitalist society. I mean, they hold a lot of market power, and they see a shortage of supply, and they drive up the prices. So you know, it's the nature of their business. At this point, you know, I think even though, you know, I'm still a believer in free markets, but I think at this point, when there's a global shortage of food supply, when people are starving, at the same time, these companies are having a windfall of profits, and that's a little bit pathetic in my view. And I think, you know, we call them out basically on this program, name these fund companies, and calling for them to put on a humanitarian face in the wake of this, you know, starving problem in many parts of the world. They need to pitch in, do their part, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Professor Mahoney, you know, as John rightly pointed out, I mean, probably food is a different commodity. It's a special commodity because it's really about feeding people and ensuring people are free from hunger. So that's probably part of the basic human rights for everybody in the world. And now we are seeing, you know, a huge profit for a few companies, but at the same time, you see people starving, some, you know, developing countries in particular. What do you make of that? You know, this is kind of like an ethical issue. It's kind of awkward too.
You know, we depend on these companies in so many ways that we have to acknowledge that they do play positive, critical roles in helping to feed people. You know, I think that it's a problem that we've experienced in recent times with the pharmaceutical companies. We depended on them to help produce vaccines to help us survive the pandemic. But you know, they also those same companies were also accused of profiteering, and we also know that they you know, played direct roles in other problems in our lives. For example, the opioid crisis in the United States, high medical care cost, and sometimes foreclosing developing countries or poor people from having access to certain critical medicines due to IPR and other issues. Now, one of the things that some critics point out about these ABCD traders is that they, you know, they control 90% or approximately 90% of the grain trade, and they are believed to have massive stockpiles that they could sell to help alleviate supply problems, but are perhaps not releasing in order to reap profits given the high prices. And the problem here is that because these are private companies, they're not transparent on how much they hold or how they could release to help increase food security.
Mm-hmm. Rob, obviously, as Professor Mahoney pointed out, you know, they take control of 90% of the trading of the grain and food over there. It's almost like a monopoly. Probably that gave them this special position to profit from such a crisis. But again, as you pointed out, you know, of course, it's understandable for private companies to make money out of whatever situation. But at the same time, you know, when you see people are starving, well, you are making a hell amount of a profit. There's a problem, right?
Well, the answer is yes and no. Of course, it's the lack of transparency of these companies, what they actually precisely do in the markets. That's a problem. At the same time, it's important to point out, even if they command a large part and maybe 80 or 90% of international trade of grains, that only 10% of total grains is traded internationally. And the rest stays within domestic borders, right? So they also control some of the domestic trade, but certainly not all. So even though they command a lot of power in international trade, that doesn't mean they control the entire market, right? So I think we have to be cautious in blaming just the companies for the problems we see, because the problems are also more fundamental that we have seen, the shortages emerging from the war in Ukraine, but also because of weather shocks and related problems that have caused tightness in the food markets. So we have to be cautious. Also, what some people have called taxes.
Oh, see, so there's a connection issue over there. Professor Mahoney, of course, if you look at the deal reached by Turkey, basically between Ukraine and Russia, people want to relieve the pressure, want to export the grains from Russia and Ukraine, and then to their credit, there's a deal, and then Russian President Vladimir Putin said in the recent speech that the absolute majority of the ships of grain go to European countries, and only a very small percentage of them go to the global south. So again, there's a problem. I don't know, maybe inequality, or somehow, the rich nations are talking about the food crisis, but at the same time, they are not really, in terms of the action, helping resolve the issue?
Well, developed countries have more money, better logistics, and in the case of Europe, more proximity to Ukraine. It's also the case that developed countries are sometimes treated as VIP buyers. It would be interesting to know whether Ukraine has privileged European buyers due to Europe's support of the Ukrainian side of the conflict. Now, this would be reasonable from a realistic perspective in international relations theory, in so much as European countries are paying a very big price for their support. But it's also the case that the global south, which has mostly remained neutral, did not benefit because of their neutrality. And I think at some point we'll sort this out and certainly figure out to what extent Putin's comments are valid, whether some of that grain moved on from Europe to other sources or to other locations.
It's an interesting point. It's like a trade-off, possibility over there. John, some organizations and politicians are calling for a windfall tax on the big grain trading firms to balance this global food market. What do you make of that? How likely is that to happen?
Zero probability in my view. It's a nice idea, but in the current political climate, who's going to impose these taxes? Who's going to collect these taxes? In the case of 3 American companies, it got to be the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service of the United States government. I don't think the American politicians are in appetite for passing a law, passing an act to impose a tax on these companies.
But John, sorry to interrupt. Remember, sure. When there's the gas prices were high, the Biden government or officials from the government, were calling for investigation of those oil companies for making bigger profit. At least there are some costs, right?
Well, it's a nice rhetoric on the part of Joe Biden, but in terms of actions, it needs a legislation to pass something that impose taxes on these companies. And think about who are actually benefiting from such a tax. It's really not so much on American consumers. I mean, the stuff is being sold in Europe, sold in other parts of the world. So the beneficiaries are people residing outside the United States. And from U.S. government's perspective, I don't see much of a political capital being accrued to the politicians pushing this. So
lack of motivation.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's move on. A recent report has presented clear evidence that the U.S. National Security Agency, or the NSA, was responsible for a cyber attack launched on April 12th against Northwestern Polytechnical University in Xi'an. How long have these cyber attacks been going on, and how can China respond? To take a closer look in this part, I'm also joined by Professor Benjamin Chiao, network expert at the Paris School of Business. Welcome to the show, Professor Chiao. Are you surprised with these, alleged attacks on the Chinese university in Xi'an?
Well, it has been going on for a while. And these attacks are increasingly being observed as the tension between the China and the U.S. has tightened.
So, okay, not a surprise, you mean? It has been going on for, okay. But finally, there's a discovery by the Chinese, I think a Chinese security firm, and also there's a government agency working together with the security firm. Finally, they collected the evidence and they pieced together evidence. That's back in April, and they drew this conclusion. It's from the NSA. So, John, I mean, NSA has been known, if you follow the Snowden story, right? They raided the headquarters of Huawei in probably 2014 or even earlier. That's according to Snowden. They invaded this their computer. So in Shenzhen. So again, probably you are not surprised either.
Not at all. National Security Agency, abbreviated as an NSA. I would say this organization is probably the mother of all hackers. It's so famous for its hacking and eavesdropping. And remember, in the days of the telephone network, this organization owns a encryption machine. I mean, it owns a company that sells an encryption machines for encrypting and decrypting messages among diplomatic communities throughout the world. So that means that it's already hacking its European allies, it's hacking its political foes in the world, it's hacking everybody. Now, of course, we're moving to the digital age. We're no longer relying on the good old telephone network anymore. It's the same business as usual. NSA has been reportedly hacking Huawei's network, for example. That's proven. It has been hacking, other hacking, for example, political leaders in Europe. Reportedly, Merkel's phone was being hacked, for example. It has done all kinds of things, and it's probably has the most sophisticated technologies of the world. Now, I think what needs to be pointed out is that for a long time, the United States government has been accusing China as being engaging cyber security, hacking, that kind of activities. But on the other hand, the United States government is doing the same thing as well. There's sort of a built-in narrative that a technologically sophisticated a country does not need to hack a less sophisticated country for stealing technologies. But I think this narrative is starting to change now, in the sense that in some areas, China is actually leading in the United States in certain defense technologies. In this case, as far as I understand, this university it has some some fields that are highly related, connected to the defense technologies. And I think the narrative that there's no need on the U.S. government to hack another country, in this case China, a defense-related university, there's no legitimate reason for that. I think this narrative needs to be challenged at this point. I mean, certainly there are certain technologies, for example, in hypersonic missile technology, for example, China is actually leading the United States for sure. So there are certain areas, spotted areas, that there's a solid reason for the U.S. government to hack and steal technologies from relevant Chinese institutions. There's a reason for that. So I think there's a lot of credibility to explain the motivation, the reasons, as well as the factual evidence that this is indeed actually happening.
Mm-hmm. Benjamin, what do you think of the explanation from from John here? That is, actually the purpose, either of collecting whatever data or technology here.
I do agree with some of John's comments. I think this time the U.S. military has been imputed for the recent cyber attack on China. So one might already ask this question: how can China be so sure about this? In fact, it is true that it's sometimes impossible to trace the roots of the hackers. But oftentimes we could firmly establish some evidence, mainly because the weakest link of many network systems are the people themselves. So, we can always work on the human factor to extract more evidence. And I really think, I agree with John's comment that the U.S. need to rethink about launching attacks again and again, because it could backfire. And also, usually some of these attacks could, impose really devastating, damages. Yet, in the conventional wars, there are elaborate procedures to start a war. But with the cyber attacks, even though the effects are similar, the launch of it could seem casual. So I think there should be a better norm in the international community to restrict this kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm. Professor Mahoney, in a recent revelation from the FBI raid of Mar-a-Lago, the home of former President Donald Trump, it's reported that the U.S. has collected the secrets of a French President Emmanuel Macron of his sex life. Why, the need of collecting secrets like this of their personal life?
To be honest with you, I think what's more interesting about this is why Trump needed to have that file in his bedroom, quite honestly. That said, the U.S. government collects information on everyone. They collected on all the U.S. citizens. This is something that really accelerated with the Patriot Act after 9/11. We know that they have back doors into American universities where they can enter university servers whenever they want, undetected, that this is a mandate if a university wants to receive any research funds from the U.S. government or scholarship funds. And we know that they are virtually unrestrained in their domestic legal capacity to spy on foreign nationals, whether those foreign nationals are overseas or in the U.S. itself. So all of this is par for the course, and I think that it's not something that is all that strange. It's always been this thing that nations have done if they've had the capacity to do it. And what I find most interesting about the revelation from the Chinese side is first the confidence that they're showing in saying that they know who did it, but also the fact that they're revealing that it happened. China doesn't always let people know when they have a vulnerability unless they are increasingly confident that they can respond to that. So I see all of this as par for the course from the U.S. side, but demonstrating a new capacity and a new confidence on the Chinese side.
Mm-hmm. The new capacity on the Chinese side, but of course, we all, for those who want, probably that's almost like said many years ago, you see they as like a surveillance of not only so-called rival nations, countries, but also their allies. As we said about Macron, French president, but also according to Snowden, the basic listening in of the phone of German Chancellor Merkel, former Chancellor Merkel, and Brazilian leaders, Indonesian leaders' email box or phones. So it's for some countries, they are not able, probably, or not capable of collecting the evidence and show, who did this. But at least on the Chinese side, now probably the U.S. will be careful. John?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I think there might be some technology gap. I'm pretty sure that the gap is being closed, and the technology on this side is probably already also fairly sophisticated in pinning down who is actually doing this, right? So, and I think it's actually a good thing that that they actually announced that this incident. For a long time, what we've been hearing is always activities on the Chinese side. I mean, I wouldn't be that naive in believing that the U.S. government, especially this agency, NSA, doesn't do that at all. I mean, that's a joke, it would be. But we just didn't say this. We didn't report this, and we probably don't have evidence. And even if we have evidence, we probably are not confident enough to announce it. But in this case, it's like a nailed case that indeed NSA actually did this. It's also quite interesting to see there's not much of a denial on Washington's part, especially NSA didn't come out and say, well, we didn't do this, it's a mistake, blah, blah, blah. No, we didn't hear that at all. So, so I think in this case, probably it's indeed true that the NSA definitely did this. So, I verifying my original point that these are activities that many governments do. And particularly in this case, the United States government, which has the most sophisticated intelligence and espionage capabilities, without a doubt.
Yeah, but let's leave it there for now and then take a look at this week's newsmaker. Queen Elizabeth II has died at age 96 following a record-breaking 70 years on the throne. Now let's take a look at the UK's longest-serving monarch. Benjamin, I will start with you here. I know you fly back and forth between China and also UK. So, what's your understanding, your perception about the Queen herself? 70 years of reign.
Yeah, I grew up in Hong Kong, so I have lots of interaction with the Britons. Entrepreneurship and capital in Hong Kong have helped China to open up since 40 years ago. I also spent a semester in Cambridge in 2020, so I truly feel that at that time, the Queen Elizabeth was deeply loved and respected by the British people. I remember going to the ponds in Cambridge, hearing the kids playing and shouting, "Don't scare the swans, they are owned and protected by the Queen." So you see, it's deeply rooted in the minds of these people. The Queen was there to protect them in some way. In addition, Queen Elizabeth was there to uphold the international image of the UK.
Professor Mahoney, what's your take on the Queen and her reign for the UK for such a long time? And of course, she's well respected, well loved inside the country and basically around the world.
One of the most interesting descriptions I saw today about her is that she was very rarely directly connected to scandal herself, at least compared to her children and her predecessors. There were some scandals, for example, how she intervened frequently in legislation to exempt herself from laws in ways that many people were not aware, protecting her financial interest. But I think the biggest concern that many have now is whether her children and grandchildren will be able to live up to the standard that she set and do so in such a hyper-media culture that loves to build people up but delights more in tearing them down. Indeed, the Queen herself was often immune to some attacks due to her popularity, while her children and grandchildren have not been. So without her here to protect the monarchy, many are worried about its future.
Well, that's the impact, of course, the loss of the Queen. John, yes, I think many people do have this concern, whether Charles the King and Prince William probably could, oversee the unraveling of the monarchy. Who knows in the years in the future? How likely is that?
Well, I think it's going to be business as usual, other than they have to change the name of their song, God Save the King now. The royal family in Great Britain, in my view, it's more of a symbolic function. It's a part of the British legacy. And also, I think in some way it holds the notion of a commonwealth together. If you look at listen to the Trudeau's speech today, he's still talking about our Queen, right? So, as the head of the state, as head of the symbolic figure for the entire Commonwealth, it serves its purpose. But I think at the end of the day, the royal family in Britain, in UK, it can change the status of the UK in the world, which is becoming more and more marginalized. In my view, I have to say this because if you look at the economy in UK, ever since the Brexit, it has not been doing so well. Even though the country claims to be a global Britain,
right.
But it's no longer global anymore. In my view, it's becoming more and more a fringe country in Europe, let alone French country of the world. So in that sense, I think even though the Queen is very much revered,
the Queen.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.